Marcus Thompson had always believed that power came from intimidation. At 35, he owned 3 successful construction companies in downtown Los Angeles, drove a black Mercedes, and lived in a penthouse that overlooked the city. His success had made him arrogant, and somewhere along the way, he had lost touch with basic human decency. The day that would change everything started like any other Tuesday morning in March. Marcus was running late for an important meeting with potential investors. His usual parking spot outside the coffee shop on Melrose Avenue was taken, forcing him to park 3 blocks away. Already irritated, he walked briskly down the sidewalk, checking his expensive watch every few seconds. The small park adjacent to the coffee shop was usually quiet at this hour, but today it seemed busier than usual. Dog walkers were out with their pets, joggers were making their morning rounds, and a few homeless individuals sat on benches, quietly minding their own business. Marcus barely noticed any of this as he hurried past. His mind focused on the presentation he was about to give. That's when he saw the dog. It was a medium-sized mixed breed, probably part golden retriever, with matted fur and a thin frame that suggested it hadn't eaten well in days. The dog was tied to a shopping cart with a frayed rope, and nearby sat an elderly homeless man who appeared to be sleeping. The dog looked up at Marcus with tired but hopeful eyes, its tail giving a weak wag. Something about the scene triggered Marcus's anger. Maybe it was his already foul mood. Maybe it was his general disdain for what he saw as the undesirable elements of the city. Or maybe it was simply years of unchecked privilege finally boiling over. Whatever the reason, Marcus felt a surge of rage at the sight of this worthless animal and its owner cluttering up his neighborhood. Without thinking, Marcus approached the dog. The animal, perhaps sensing kindness despite Marcus's hostile intentions, tried to stand and greet him. That's when Marcus drew back his foot and delivered a sharp kick to the dog's ribs. The animal yelped in pain and cowered, looking up at Marcus with confusion and fear. The elderly homeless man stirred at the sound. "Hey, what are you doing to my dog?" he called out weakly, trying to sit up straighter. Marcus felt emboldened by the man's frail condition. "Keep your mutt away from decent people," he snarled and kicked the dog again, this time harder. The poor animal whimpered and tried to crawl under the shopping cart for protection. "Please don't hurt Charlie," the old man pleaded, struggling to get to his feet. "He's all I have left." But Marcus was beyond reason now. The power he felt in that moment, the ability to cause pain without consequence, fed something dark inside him. He kicked the dog a 3rd time, and the animal's cry of pain echoed through the quiet park. What Marcus didn't notice was that his actions were being observed. A jogger had stopped her morning run and was recording everything on her phone from about 50 feet away. A woman walking her own dog had pulled out her cell phone as well. And sitting on a bench near the fountain, reading a newspaper and dressed in simple workout clothes, was someone who would soon become very important to this story. Marcus straightened his tie and smoothed down his hair, preparing to continue to his meeting as if nothing had happened. The homeless man was now kneeling beside his injured dog, trying to comfort the whimpering animal. Tears were streaming down the old man's weathered face. "You can't just hurt innocent animals," the man said, his voice breaking. "Charlie never did anything to you." Marcus laughed coldly. "Call the police if you want. See how seriously they take a complaint from someone like you." He gestured dismissively at the man's tattered clothes and cardboard sign that read, "Veteran, anything helps." The cruelty of the moment seemed to hang in the air. Here was a man who had clearly fallen on hard times, possibly someone who had served his country, being tormented by someone who had never known real struggle, and his only companion, a loyal dog who had probably been his comfort through countless difficult nights, was now injured and scared. Marcus began to walk away, feeling satisfied with himself. In his twisted mind, he had just demonstrated his dominance over the weak elements of society. He had shown that he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. After all, who was going to stop him? Who was going to stand up for a homeless man and his dog? As he approached the exit of the small park, Marcus noticed that several people were staring at him. Some had their phones out, and he could see the disgust and anger in their faces. For a moment, doubt crept into his mind. Maybe kicking the dog in public hadn't been the smartest move. But then he reminded himself of who he was. He had money, influence, and lawyers. What could any of these people really do to him? The woman who had been jogging approached him as he reached the sidewalk. "Excuse me, sir," she said, slightly out of breath. What you just did was completely unacceptable. That poor animal didn't deserve that. Marcus turned to face her with a sneer. Mind your own business, lady. Maybe spend less time worrying about stray dogs and more time worrying about your own problems. The woman held up her phone. I recorded everything. I'm sending this to animal control and the police right now. Marcus laughed again, but this time there was a hint of nervousness in his voice. Go ahead. I'll have my lawyers make sure nothing comes of it. Do you have any idea who I am? What Marcus didn't realize was that his troubles were just beginning. The man sitting on the bench had finished reading his newspaper and was now walking in their direction. And this wasn't just any man. This was someone who had built his entire career on standing up to bullies. Someone who had spent decades portraying characters who fought for justice and protected the innocent. The morning was about to take a turn that Marcus Thompson could never have imagined. The jogger was still holding her phone up, her finger hovering over the send button, when a calm but firm voice cut through the tension. I think you owe that man and his dog an apology. Marcus turned around to see who had the audacity to interfere in his business. Standing about 10 feet away was a man in his 50s, wearing simple gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt. He was clearly in excellent physical condition, with the kind of build that came from years of disciplined training. His face was weathered but kind, and his eyes held an intensity that made Marcus suddenly uncomfortable. There was something familiar about the man, but Marcus couldn't quite place him. This is none of your concern, Marcus said, trying to maintain his aggressive posture. I suggest you keep walking. The man didn't move. Instead, he took a step closer, and Marcus could see that despite his calm demeanor, there was something dangerous about him. Not dangerous in a reckless way, but dangerous in the way that a professional athlete or trained fighter carries themselves. Controlled, confident, and completely unafraid. Actually, it is my concern, the man said evenly. When I see someone hurting a defenseless animal, that becomes everyone's concern. Marcus felt a flicker of recognition, but still couldn't place where he'd seen this face before. Look, buddy, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm not in the mood for a lecture. I have an important meeting to get to. The man glanced over at the homeless veteran who was still cradling his injured dog. The old man was whispering softly to the animal, trying to calm it down. The dog's breathing was labored, and it was clear that Marcus's kicks had caused real damage. Your meeting can wait, the man said, his voice taking on a harder edge. Right now you're going to walk over there and apologize to that gentleman. Then you're going to help him get his dog to a veterinarian. Marcus felt his face flush with anger. No one talked to him like this. No one gave him orders. He was Marcus Thompson, owner of 3 successful companies, a man who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. I'm not doing anything, Marcus snapped. And if you don't get out of my face right now, I'm calling the police and having you arrested for harassment. The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that wolves might give to sheep just before dinner. Please do call the police. I'm sure they'd be very interested in seeing the video footage of you assaulting that dog. It was then that Marcus noticed more people had gathered around. The jogger was still recording, but now there were at least 6 other people with their phones out, all of them capturing every word of this confrontation. A small crowd was forming, and Marcus could feel their collective judgment pressing down on him. The familiar-looking man took another step closer, and Marcus instinctively backed up. There was something about the way this stranger moved that triggered every survival instinct Marcus had. This wasn't some random Good Samaritan. This was someone who knew how to handle himself in dangerous situations. Look, I don't want any trouble, Marcus said, his voice losing some of its earlier arrogance. Maybe I got a little carried away, but it's not like I killed the thing. The crowd murmured angrily at this callous comment. Someone called out, "You're a monster." Another voice shouted, "How could you hurt an innocent animal?" The man in the gray sweatpants held up a hand, and surprisingly the crowd fell silent. There was clearly something about him that commanded respect even from strangers. "A little carried away?" the man repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "You deliberately and repeatedly kicked a defenseless animal, an animal that belongs to a veteran who has already sacrificed more for this country than you could ever understand." Marcus glanced around nervously. The crowd was growing larger and their expressions were becoming more hostile. He was starting to realize that this situation might actually have consequences for him. In his world of boardrooms and business deals, he was used to being the one with all the power. But here, surrounded by ordinary people who were disgusted by his actions, he felt vulnerable for the first time in years. Fine, Marcus said, trying to regain control of the situation. I'll write the old man a check for a vet bill. Will that satisfy everyone? The man shook his head. Money isn't going to fix this. You think you can just buy your way out of being a decent human being? That's when it hit Marcus where he'd seen this face before. Movie posters, action films, magazine covers. This wasn't just some random stranger. This was Jason Statham, the action movie star. Marcus had seen every single one of his films, had even quoted his lines to impress clients at business dinners. The realization should have excited Marcus under different circumstances. Meeting a famous actor would normally be something he'd brag about for months. But right now, with Jason Statham staring at him with obvious disgust, Marcus felt nothing but dread. Jason seemed to notice the recognition in Marcus's eyes. That's right, he said quietly. I'm exactly who you think I am. And right now I'm using whatever influence I have to make sure this video goes viral and everyone sees what kind of person you really are. Marcus felt his knees go weak. He thought about his business, his reputation, his carefully crafted image as a successful entrepreneur. One viral video could destroy everything he'd worked for. His investors, his clients, his employees. They would all see him as the man who kicked a homeless veteran's dog. Mr. Statham, Marcus stammered, I'm sure we can work something out. I'm a big fan of your work. I've seen all your movies. Surely we can handle this like gentlemen. Jason's expression didn't change. Gentlemen don't kick dogs. Gentlemen don't bully people who can't defend themselves. You want to handle this like a gentleman? Then start by acting like one. The crowd was getting restless. People were shouting suggestions about what should happen to Marcus. Some were calling for the police. Others were suggesting more immediate forms of justice. The situation was spiraling out of control, and Marcus could see his entire life unraveling in real time. Jason raised his hand again, and once more the crowd fell silent. Here's what's going to happen, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to taking charge. You're going to walk over to that man and apologize sincerely. Then you're going to take him and his dog to the nearest animal hospital and pay for whatever treatment is needed. After that, you're going to write him a check for enough money to keep him and his dog fed and housed for the next 6 months. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but Jason cut him off, Jason continued, I can make sure this video reaches every news outlet, every social media platform, and every person in your professional network. Your choice. Marcus stood frozen for a long moment, weighing his options. The crowd around him had grown to at least 20 people, all of them holding phones and recording his every move. Jason Statham stood directly in front of him, arms crossed, waiting for an answer. The homeless veteran continued to comfort his injured dog, occasionally looking up at the commotion with confused, worried eyes. The business meeting that had seemed so important 15 minutes ago now felt completely trivial. Marcus thought about the investors waiting for him in the conference room across town. They were probably checking their watches right now, wondering where he was. But that problem seemed insignificant compared to the disaster unfolding in front of him. I need to think about this, Marcus said weakly. Jason shook his head. There's nothing to think about. You have 2 choices. Do the right thing now, or face the consequences of your actions going public. And let me be clear, these consequences will be severe. A woman in the crowd called out, He doesn't deserve a choice. Call the police right now, another voice shouted. Someone like that shouldn't be allowed to walk free. Jason turned slightly toward the crowd. I understand your anger. What this man did was inexcusable, but everyone deserves a chance to make things right, even someone who has acted so poorly. Marcus felt a strange mix of gratitude and terror. Jason Statham was literally the only thing standing between him and an angry mob. Yet at the same time, the actor was also the biggest threat to Marcus's reputation and livelihood. If I do what you're asking, Marcus said quietly. How do I know you won't release the video anyway? Jason stared at him for a long moment. Because I'm not interested in destroying you for the sake of destruction. I'm interested in justice. If you genuinely make amends, and I mean genuinely, then maybe this doesn't have to ruin your life. But if you're just going through the motions, if you're just trying to buy your way out of trouble without actually learning anything, then yes, the world will see exactly who you are. The homeless veteran had been listening to this exchange, and now he struggled to his feet. Charlie, his injured dog, whimpered as the movement jostled him. The old man was clearly in pain himself. Arthritis, perhaps, or old injuries from his military service. "Excuse me," the veteran said, his voice hoarse but dignified. "I don't want to cause any trouble for anyone. If this gentleman wants to just go about his business, that's fine. Charlie and I have dealt with worse." The simple grace of this response seemed to shame everyone present, including Marcus. Here was a man who had been attacked, whose beloved companion had been injured, and he was still trying to defuse the situation to avoid causing problems for others. Jason walked over to the veteran. "What's your name, sir?" "Robert Martinez," the old man replied. "Army, 2 tours in Afghanistan. This here is Charlie. Found him outside a VA hospital about 3 years ago. Been my best friend ever since." Jason knelt down and gently extended his hand toward Charlie. The dog was clearly in pain but still managed a weak tail wag at the kind gesture.
"How badly is he hurt?"
Robert carefully lifted Charlie's lip to show his gums, which were pale, a sign of possible internal bleeding. "He needs to see a vet right away." Those kicks were hard, and Charlie's not a young dog anymore. The crowd murmured angrily again, and several people directed harsh comments at Marcus. But Jason stood up and addressed Marcus directly. "Look at him," Jason said, pointing to Robert. "Look at this man who served his country, who has fallen on hard times through no fault of his own, who asks for nothing except to be left in peace with his dog. And look at what you did to them." Marcus did look, really look, for the first time. He saw the faded military insignia on Robert's worn jacket. He saw the pride the man took in keeping himself and his few possessions as clean as possible, despite living on the street. He saw the love between Robert and Charlie, and the pain in both their eyes. For the first time that morning, Marcus felt something other than anger or fear. He felt shame. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, but his voice was barely audible. "I can't hear you," Jason said firmly. Marcus cleared his throat and spoke louder. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did to your dog, and I'm sorry for the way I treated you." Robert nodded slowly. "I appreciate that, son. We all make mistakes." The generosity of this response nearly brought Marcus to tears. He had expected anger, demands for revenge, hatred. Instead, this man he had wronged was showing him more kindness than he deserved. Jason stepped back and addressed the crowd. "I need everyone to give us some space here. Robert needs to get his dog to a veterinarian immediately, and this situation needs to be resolved properly." Most of the crowd began to disperse, though several people continued recording from a distance. The jogger who had initially confronted Marcus walked over to Jason. "I've got the whole thing recorded," she said. "What should I do with it?" Jason looked at Marcus, then back at the woman. "Hold on to it for now. Let's see how this plays out." Marcus realized this was his moment of truth. Everything depended on what he did next. He could go through the motions, write some checks, and hope the whole thing would blow over. Or he could actually try to make amends in a meaningful way. He thought about his life, his success, his penthouse apartment, and expensive car. All of it felt hollow compared to the simple dignity of Robert Martinez and the loyalty of a dog named Charlie. "Mr. Martinez," Marcus said, approaching slowly, "I want to take you and Charlie to the best veterinary hospital in the city. Whatever treatment he needs, whatever it costs, I'll pay for it. And I want to help you get back on your feet." Robert looked surprised. "That's very kind of you, but I don't want charity." "It's not charity," Marcus replied. "It's the least I can do to try to make up for what I did. You served our country, and you deserve better than living on the street." Jason watched this exchange carefully, trying to determine whether Marcus's change of heart was genuine or just performance. The test would come in the days and weeks ahead. "There's a 24-hour animal hospital about 10 minutes from here," Jason said. "My car is parked right over there. Let's get Charlie the help he needs." As they carefully lifted Charlie and helped Robert gather his few belongings, Marcus felt like he was seeing the world clearly for the first time in years. The meeting he was missing, the business deals, the money, none of it mattered as much as this moment, this chance to do something right. The veterinary hospital was one of the most expensive in Los Angeles, the kind of place where celebrities brought their pets for everything from routine checkups to emergency surgery. As Jason's Range Rover pulled into the parking lot, Marcus couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between this gleaming facility and the park where they had found Robert and Charlie just 30 minutes earlier. Dr. Sarah Chen, the head veterinarian, personally took Charlie into the examination room after Jason explained the situation. Robert insisted on staying with his dog during the examination, despite the obvious pain he was in from his own health issues. Marcus watched through the window as the elderly veteran held Charlie's head gently, whispering reassurances while the medical team worked. 3 broken ribs and internal bruising, Dr. Chen announced after completing her examination. The good news is that there doesn't appear to be any permanent damage to his organs. But he's going to need surgery to repair one of the ribs, pain medication, and several weeks of careful monitoring. Marcus felt sick to his stomach hearing the extent of Charlie's injuries. He had done this. His anger, his arrogance, his complete lack of empathy had caused this innocent animal to suffer. Whatever he needs, Marcus said quickly. Cost is not an issue, Dr. Chen nodded. The surgery and recovery will be expensive, probably around $8,000 total. Are you sure about this? Robert started to protest. That's too much money. Charlie's an old dog. Maybe it would be better to just... No, Marcus interrupted firmly. Charlie is going to get the best care possible. That's a promise. While Charlie was being prepared for surgery, Jason suggested they go to the hospital cafeteria to wait. Robert moved slowly, clearly fighting his own pain with every step. Marcus realized that the veteran probably hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. When was the last time you had something to eat? Marcus asked as they sat down with trays of food. Robert thought for a moment. Yesterday morning, I think. A lady at the church gave me a sandwich. Marcus watched as Robert ate carefully, savoring each bite like it might be his last meal. The contrast with Marcus's own usual dining experiences, expensive restaurants where he barely tasted his food while making business deals, was striking. Tell me about Afghanistan, Marcus said, genuinely curious for the first time about someone else's experience. Robert's eyes took on a distant look. 2 tours, like I said. Lost a lot of good friends over there. Came back with some injuries, physical and otherwise. The VA tried to help, but the system is overwhelmed. I had a job for a while working construction, but the nightmares and the pain made it hard to keep up. One thing led to another and I ended up on the street. What about family? Marcus asked. Wife divorced me while I was deployed the second time. Can't blame her, really. Military life is hard on marriages. Kids chose to stay with her, and honestly, that was probably for the best. I wasn't in any condition to be a father when I got back. Jason had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. How did you end up with Charlie? Robert's face brightened slightly. Found him outside the VA hospital one night about 3 years ago. He was just a puppy then, skinny and scared. Somebody had dumped him there, I guess. We kind of found each other. He's been the best company an old soldier could ask for. Marcus felt something breaking apart inside his chest. This man had served his country, had lost friends in combat, had struggled with invisible wounds that society barely acknowledged, and yet he had still found room in his heart to care for an abandoned puppy. Meanwhile, Marcus had kicked that same dog simply because he was having a bad morning. I need to ask you something, Marcus said suddenly. Why aren't you angry with me? If someone had done to my dog what I did to Charlie, I would want to kill them. Robert considered the question carefully. Anger is a luxury I can't afford. It takes too much energy, and I need all my energy just to survive each day. Besides, you're here now, doing the right thing. That's what matters. Dr. Chen appeared at their table. Charlie came through the surgery beautifully. He's going to be fine, but he'll need to stay here for at least a week for monitoring and recovery. After that, he'll need several more weeks of limited activity and medication. The relief on Robert's face was overwhelming. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he thanked Dr. Chen over and over again. There's something else, Dr. Chen continued. I couldn't help but notice that you seem to be in some discomfort yourself, Mr. Martinez. When was the last time you saw a doctor? Robert wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Been a while. The VA clinic is always so crowded and it's hard to get there without a car. Marcus looked at Jason, who nodded slightly. Dr. Chen, could you recommend someone who could examine Mr. Martinez today? I'll cover all the costs. I have a colleague at Cedars-Sinai who specializes in veteran care. I could call him right now. Within an hour, they were at another hospital where Dr. Michael Torres, a physician who volunteered with veteran organizations, was examining Robert. The diagnosis was sobering. Advanced arthritis, malnutrition, untreated diabetes, and signs of chronic pain that had been ignored for years. You need immediate treatment for the diabetes, Dr. Torres explained, and we need to get you on a proper diet and medication regimen for the arthritis and pain management. How long has it been since you've had stable housing? About 2 years, Robert admitted. Dr. Torres looked at Marcus and Jason. He needs somewhere safe and clean to recover, with access to regular meals and medical care. The street is no place for someone in his condition. That evening, Marcus found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He sat quietly in his penthouse apartment and really thought about his life. He had canceled his investor meeting, postponed 3 other appointments, and spent the entire day focused on helping Robert and Charlie. His phone had been buzzing constantly with calls and messages from business associates wondering where he was. His assistant had sent increasingly frantic emails about rescheduled meetings and concerned clients. But for the first time in his adult life, Marcus realized that none of that felt important. He thought about Robert's dignity in the face of hardship, about Charlie's trust despite being hurt, about Jason Statham's willingness to use his influence to protect someone who couldn't protect himself. These were qualities that Marcus realized he had abandoned long ago in his pursuit of wealth and success. The next morning, Marcus drove to a hotel near the veterinary hospital, where he had arranged for Robert to stay while Charlie recovered. He found the veteran sitting by the window, looking more rested than he had the day before but still worried about his dog. "I've been thinking," Marcus said without preamble. "I want to offer you a job." Robert looked surprised. "A job doing what?" "I own 3 construction companies. You have construction experience, and I need someone I can trust to oversee quality control on our projects. The pay is good, it comes with health insurance, and I'll help you find permanent housing." "That's very generous," Robert said slowly. "But I'm not sure I'm in any condition to work construction anymore. These old bones don't move like they used to." "It's not physical labor," Marcus explained. "It's oversight and management, making sure the work is being done right, that safety protocols are followed, that the crew is treating each other with respect. It's actually the most important job on any construction site." Robert was quiet for a long moment. "Why are you doing this? Yesterday you didn't even see me as human." Marcus struggled to find the right words. "Because yesterday I was a different person. Because you and Charlie showed me what real dignity looks like. Because I want to become the kind of man who deserves a second chance." Robert extended his hand and Marcus shook it firmly. It was the beginning of a friendship that would change both their lives forever. 3 months later, Marcus barely recognized his own life. The change had started small. Hiring Robert was just the beginning. As Robert recovered from his health issues and began working as a quality control supervisor, Marcus discovered that his new employee brought something to the job sites that had been missing for years: genuine care for the workers and their safety. Robert treated every construction worker with respect, regardless of their position or background. He knew their names, asked about their families, and made sure they had proper safety equipment and training. The transformation in workplace morale was immediate and dramatic. Productivity increased, accidents decreased, and for the first time in years, Marcus received letters from employees thanking him for creating a positive work environment. But the changes went much deeper than just business improvements. Marcus found himself questioning everything about how he had been living. The penthouse apartment that had once been his pride and joy now felt cold and empty. The expensive restaurants where he used to conduct business seemed wasteful when he knew there were people like Robert, struggling to find their next meal. Charlie had made a full recovery, and was now a fixture at the construction sites. Robert had initially been hesitant to bring his dog to work, but Marcus insisted. Charlie became something of a mascot, boosting morale and reminding everyone that even in the tough world of construction, there was room for compassion and loyalty. Jason Statham had stayed in touch throughout this period, checking in occasionally to see how Robert was adjusting and whether Marcus was following through on his commitments. What had started as a threat from the action star had gradually evolved into something approaching friendship, built on mutual respect for what Marcus was trying to become. "I have to admit," Jason said during one of their coffee meetings, "I wasn't sure you were genuine that first day. I've seen a lot of people make promises when they're backed into a corner, only to go back to their old ways once the pressure is off." Marcus stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "I wasn't sure I was genuine either, but spending time with Robert, seeing how he approaches life despite everything he's been through, it made me realize how shallow my existence had become." "What about your business associates? How have they reacted to the changes?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "About half of them think I've lost my mind. They can't understand why I'm wasting money on employee benefits and safety improvements. Some of my biggest clients have taken their business elsewhere because they think I've gone soft. Any regrets? None, Marcus replied without hesitation. I'm making less money now, but I actually enjoy going to work. I used to dread Monday mornings because it meant another week of treating people like disposable resources. Now I look forward to seeing what positive changes we can make. The video from that day in the park had never been released publicly. The jogger who recorded everything had given the footage to Jason, who kept it as insurance. But as Marcus continued to demonstrate real change rather than just empty gestures, the video became less important. The threat of public humiliation had been the catalyst for transformation, but it was no longer the driving force. Robert had moved into a small apartment near one of the construction sites, and his health had improved dramatically with regular medical care and proper nutrition. He had even reconnected with his adult children, who were amazed by their father's positive outlook and stability after years of struggle. I never thought I'd say this, Robert told Marcus one evening as they watched Charlie play in the small dog park near Robert's apartment. But getting kicked by you might have been the best thing that ever happened to me. Marcus winced at the memory. I still can't believe I did that. When I think about the person I was that morning, you were in pain, Robert said simply. Different kind of pain than what I was dealing with, but pain nonetheless. Hurt people until something breaks the cycle. What broke the cycle for you? After everything you went through in the military, losing your family, ending up on the street, how did you manage to stay so decent? Robert watched Charlie chase a tennis ball that a young girl had thrown for him. Charlie, actually, having something to care about other than myself. When you're responsible for another living being, when something depends on you for survival, it gives you a reason to be better than your worst impulses. The conversation was interrupted by Marcus's phone ringing. It was his assistant, calling about a situation at one of the job sites. A worker had been injured, nothing serious, but he needed medical attention. I'll be right there, Marcus said, ending the call. 3 months ago, he would have told his assistant to handle it and send him a report later. Now his first instinct was to go personally and make sure his employee was properly cared for. As they drove to the construction site, Robert asked, "Do you ever miss your old life? The money, the status, the power over people?" Marcus considered the question carefully. I miss the simplicity of it sometimes. When you only care about yourself, decisions are easier. But I don't miss the loneliness, and I don't miss the constant anxiety about maintaining an image that was basically built on treating other people badly. At the job site, they found that the injured worker, a young man named Miguel, had fallen from a scaffolding and sprained his ankle. The site foreman was apologetic and defensive, clearly expecting to be blamed for the accident. But Marcus surprised everyone by focusing entirely on Miguel's well-being. He personally drove the young man to the emergency room, stayed with him during treatment, and made sure he understood that his job would be waiting for him when he recovered, with full pay during his absence. "Boss," Miguel said as Marcus helped him fill out insurance paperwork, "I've worked construction for 15 years, and I've never had an employer come to the hospital with me. Most of the time they act like accidents are our fault and try to find ways to avoid paying for treatment." Marcus felt a familiar pang of shame. He knew that just a few months ago he would have been exactly that kind of employer. "Every person who works for my company is valuable," he replied. "Your safety and well-being matter to me." Word of Marcus's response to Miguel's accident spread quickly through the local construction community. Within a week, he had received applications from dozens of experienced workers who wanted to join a company that actually cared about its employees. For the first time in years, Marcus was having to turn away qualified applicants because his crews were fully staffed with people who genuinely wanted to work for him. The transformation was becoming visible in other ways, too. Marcus had quietly begun funding a small program to help homeless veterans get back on their feet, working with local VA hospitals and social services. He didn't publicize it or use it for tax benefits. It was simply something that felt necessary after seeing what Robert had been through. One afternoon, while visiting Charlie at the vet for a routine checkup, Marcus encountered Dr. Chen in the parking lot. She had been following Charlie's recovery and Robert's situation with interest. "I have to tell you," she said, "what you did for Robert and Charlie has inspired several of our other clients. We've had 3 people this month offer to help with veterinary bills for pets belonging to homeless individuals." Sometimes one act of genuine kindness creates a ripple effect that goes far beyond what anyone expects. That evening, Marcus found himself thinking about ripple effects as he sat in his apartment. He had downsized from the penthouse to a comfortable but modest place closer to his work sites. The change felt right, less ostentatious, more practical, more honest about who he was becoming. Jason called just as Marcus was preparing dinner, something he had learned to enjoy instead of always eating at restaurants or having food delivered. "I have some news," Jason said. "That video from the park, I'm going to delete it." Marcus felt a surprising mix of relief and something else, almost disappointment. "Are you sure? I mean, I appreciate it, but you don't have to do that for my sake." "I'm not doing it for your sake," Jason replied. "I'm doing it because it's no longer necessary. The person in that video doesn't exist anymore. What would be the point of destroying someone who's genuinely changed?" After hanging up, Marcus realized that Jason was right. The angry, entitled man who had kicked Charlie that morning in March was gone. In his place was someone who was still learning, still making mistakes, still figuring out how to be a decent human being, but someone who was genuinely trying. The next morning brought unexpected news. Miguel, the worker who had been injured, arrived at the construction site with his arm in a sling but ready to return to light duty. With him was his teenage son, who had apparently been telling everyone at school about the boss who came to the hospital and made sure his father was taken care of. "Mr. Thompson," the boy said shyly, "my dad says you're different from other bosses. He says you actually care about your workers." "Your father is a good man and a hard worker," Marcus replied. "He deserves to be treated with respect." The boy brightened. "He's been talking about maybe going back to school to become a supervisor or something. He says working here makes him feel like he could have a real career again, not just a job." As Marcus watched Miguel carefully return to work, supervised closely by Robert to ensure he didn't re-injure himself, he realized that this was what success actually looked like. Not the numbers in his bank account or the size of his apartment or the deference of his employees, but the knowledge that his actions were helping other people build better lives. Charlie wandered over and sat next to Marcus, looking up at him with the kind of trust that had to be earned. Marcus reached down and gently petted the dog's head, still amazed that this animal could forgive him for the terrible thing he had done. "You're a better teacher than any business school professor I ever had," Marcus said quietly to Charlie. "You taught me that real strength comes from protecting those who can't protect themselves, not from hurting them." The dog's tail wagged once and Marcus smiled. It was going to be a good day. 1 year after that fateful morning in the park, Marcus stood before a crowd of nearly 200 people at the annual Los Angeles Veterans Support Gala. He had never intended to become a public speaker or an advocate for veteran issues, but sometimes life takes you in directions you never expected. The organization had asked him to share his story, how he had gone from being someone who would hurt a homeless veteran's dog to becoming one of the city's most prominent supporters of veteran services. It wasn't a story he was proud of, but it was one that needed to be told. 12 months ago, Marcus began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "I was the worst version of myself. I was successful by every measure our society typically uses. Wealthy, powerful, feared by my competitors and employees. But I was also empty, angry, and so disconnected from basic human decency that I would kick an innocent animal simply because I was having a bad day." In the audience, Robert sat at a table near the front, wearing a suit that Marcus had helped him pick out. Charlie wasn't with them tonight. The venue didn't allow pets. But the dog was safe and comfortable at Robert's apartment, probably sleeping on the couch that Marcus had insisted on buying despite Robert's protests that he didn't need fancy furniture. "The man whose dog I attacked that day is here tonight," Marcus continued, gesturing toward Robert. Robert Martinez served 2 tours in Afghanistan, lost friends in combat, came home to a country that didn't know how to help him with his invisible wounds. Through a series of circumstances that could happen to any of us, he found himself living on the street with only his dog for companionship. Marcus paused, making eye contact with several people in the audience. He had learned that the most important part of public speaking wasn't the words you said, but the connection you made with the people listening. "When I hurt Charlie that morning, I wasn't just attacking an animal. I was attacking everything that Robert held dear, everything that gave his difficult life meaning and purpose. I was attacking loyalty, love, and the simple dignity of a man who had already sacrificed more for this country than I could comprehend. The audience was completely silent now. Marcus could see some people wiping their eyes, others leaning forward to hear every word. But this story isn't really about my cruelty, and it's not about Robert's forgiveness, though both of those things matter. This story is about what happened next, about the intervention that changed everything. Marcus smiled slightly as he spotted Jason Statham near the back of the room. The actor had flown in from London specifically for this event, though he had insisted on keeping a low profile. A stranger witnessed what I had done and refused to let it stand. He didn't know me, didn't know Robert, had nothing to gain by getting involved. But he understood something that I had forgotten, that we have a responsibility to protect those who cannot protect themselves, and to stand up to bullies even when it's inconvenient or risky. The crowd began to murmur as people recognized Jason, but the actor shook his head slightly, clearly preferring to let Marcus continue without drawing attention to himself. That stranger forced me to confront who I had become. He made me choose between continuing to be the kind of person who would hurt innocent creatures for no reason, or becoming the kind of person who would take responsibility for my actions and try to make amends. Marcus looked directly at Robert, who nodded encouragingly. Robert could have chosen revenge. He could have pursued legal action, could have demanded that I be punished, could have used the video evidence to destroy my reputation and my business. Instead, he chose grace. He gave me something I didn't deserve and a second chance. That second chance changed my life. Robert came to work for my construction company, and his presence transformed our entire workplace culture. Productivity increased, accidents decreased, and employee satisfaction went through the roof. But more importantly, I learned what it felt like to go to work each day knowing that I was making people's lives better, instead of worse. Marcus gestured toward several tables where his employees sat with their families. Tonight we have dozens of my workers here, people who now have comprehensive health insurance, safe working conditions, and the knowledge that their employer sees them as human beings rather than disposable resources. The audience began to applaud, but Marcus held up his hand. I'm not telling you this story to congratulate myself. I'm telling you because transformation is possible, but only if we're willing to acknowledge the truth about who we've been and commit to becoming better. He took a deep breath before continuing with the most difficult part of his speech. Over the past year, I've met dozens of veterans who are struggling with homelessness, addiction, mental health issues, and the bureaucratic maze of getting proper care. I've learned that Robert's story isn't unusual. It's heartbreakingly common. We have thousands of men and women in this city alone who served their country with honor and are now living on the streets. The program we're launching tonight isn't charity, Marcus said firmly. It's an obligation. These veterans earned our support through their service. They shouldn't have to earn it again by being perfect victims or by having someone like me attack them before we notice they exist. Marcus outlined the comprehensive program. He had spent months developing with Robert's input: transitional housing, job training, mental health services, and a unique partnership with local businesses to provide meaningful employment opportunities. Robert Martinez taught me that dignity isn't something you lose when you fall down, Marcus concluded. It's something you choose to maintain no matter how hard life gets. Charlie taught me that love and loyalty don't depend on circumstances. They depend on character. And a stranger in a park taught me that real strength means using whatever power you have to lift others up, not to tear them down. The standing ovation lasted for nearly 5 minutes. As people gradually returned to their seats, Marcus felt something he had never experienced before: the satisfaction of using his voice and his resources for something genuinely meaningful. After the formal program ended, Marcus found himself surrounded by people wanting to contribute to the Veteran Support Program, share their own stories, or simply thank him for his honesty. But the conversation that mattered most came from Robert himself. "I'm proud of you," the older man said simply as they stood together near the exit. "You don't have anything to be proud of," Marcus replied. "I'm the one who should be thanking you." "No," Robert said firmly. "What you did that morning was terrible. But what you've chosen to do since then, that's been beautiful. Charlie and I, we got our happy ending. But because of what you're doing now, a lot of other veterans and their animals are going to get happy endings too." Outside the hotel, Jason approached them as they waited for their cars. "Good speech," the actor said to Marcus. "You've come a long way from the man I met in that park." "I had good teachers," Marcus replied, looking at both Jason and Robert. "The best teachers usually come into our lives when we least expect them," Jason observed. "Sometimes they come as strangers who refuse to let us get away with being less than we could be. Sometimes they come as people we've wronged who choose to show us grace instead of revenge." As they prepared to part ways, Charlie came running up to them. Robert's neighbor had brought the dog to pick up Robert, and Charlie immediately went to Marcus for attention, tail wagging enthusiastically. Marcus knelt down and let Charlie lick his face, still amazed that this animal could love someone who had once hurt him so badly. "He forgave me faster than I forgave myself," Marcus said. "That's what dogs do," Robert replied. "They live in the present. They don't hold on to past hurts. Maybe that's something we humans could learn from them." As Marcus drove home that night, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this point. A year ago, he had been wealthy but miserable, powerful but empty, successful but completely alone. Tonight, he was surrounded by friends, engaged in meaningful work, and genuinely excited about the future. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been days when he wanted to go back to his old ways, when caring about other people felt like too much work, when the financial cost of doing the right thing seemed overwhelming. But every time he wavered, he thought about Robert's dignity, Charlie's loyalty, and Jason's willingness to stand up for what was right, even when it would have been easier to walk away. Marcus pulled into his driveway and sat in his car for a moment, looking at his modest house with its small yard and simple furnishings. It wasn't the penthouse he used to own, but it was a home filled with purpose and genuine relationships rather than expensive things that impressed strangers. Tomorrow he would go back to work, not because he had to, but because he knew that his employees were counting on him to create a workplace where they were treated with dignity and respect. Tomorrow he would check on the veteran support program, not because it was good publicity, but because Robert had shown him that every person deserves a chance to rebuild their life. And tomorrow, like every day for the past year, he would remember the lesson that a homeless veteran and his injured dog had taught him, that real success isn't measured by what you can take from the world, but by what you can give back to it. The man who had kicked Charlie in that park was gone forever. In his place was someone still learning, still growing, still making mistakes, but committed to being worthy of the second chance he had been given. It was the best trade Marcus Thompson had ever made.